Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of our fabulous, probably 2-part series on Figma for Magicians, how Figma can factor into your practice for all of your design needs. Actually, even if you're not doing design as part of your practice, maybe you're just making a poster for a garage sale or something. Whatever your design needs are, I'm going to continue my impassioned plea to make Figma your one-stop shop for any of your design needs. But before we dive into the content of our episode 2 in our 2-episode arc here, there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. One is something that I forgot to mention in the prior video, which I think is very useful for knowing in Figma. And the other is a general message around the intersection of technology and magic. And let's start with the second thing first. Which I don't know why I did them in opposite order than they're here on the slide. Whatever, I'm a little crazy that way. So I want to very briefly, ideally, talk about technology as part of the ecosystem in which modern practitioners find themselves. And this is an ongoing conversation which I see happening in online communities, Discord groups, in face-to-face conversations with other practitioners. There's this kind of ongoing, what does it mean to legitimately involve technology in your practice? And there's a couple things that I want folks to think about, and I don't want to deep dive on this too much here, but I'm going to link a couple of videos in the description of this video, or actually, sorry, not videos. I'm going to link a couple of podcast episodes. One of which is a conversation that I had with the lovely Reverend Eric on the Arnemancy podcast. If you're not familiar with the Arnemancy podcast, I highly recommend it. It's really fantastic. Eric right now is actually doing a deep dive on the Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. It's really fantastic. I was on the podcast a couple of times talking about the intersection of technology and magic. Heather Freeman, who's also amazing, of the Familiar Shapes podcast, also talking about a very similar subject. I'll link both of these in the description of this video so you can go and check them out. But what I want you to think about is that anything that you're using in your practice that is a man-made thing, whatever it is, was at one point in time new technology. My dog is chewing out a ball and it's very loud. So if there's a weird sound in the background, that's just my dog chewing out a ball. We're really great tool makers, and we've made tools throughout time, and even the tools that we've made, we evolve throughout time. If you use candles as part of your practice, candles were at one point in time a new technology, and the candles that we use today are very different than candles that might have been used by practitioners 200 years ago. And before candles, there were lamps. And so maybe you say, well, I don't use candles in my practice because I'm very old school. I use oil-burning lamps. Well, oil-burning lamps and oil-burning lanterns were also new technology at one point in time. Iron forging was new technology at one point in time. Paper was a new technology at one point in time. So when you're thinking about technology and how to fold it into your practice, just remember that at any point in time, you have access to the stuff that you have access to. And to arbitrarily not use something because it's modern, I think is something you should examine if you find yourself kind of in that position. Again, a couple of good podcast episodes that I'll link here, and just something for you to think about. It's my personal opinion that if, for example, Agrippa were alive today, that he would probably use Figma because it's rad. So anyway, that's just a quick comment that I wanted to make after talking to folks about the first video. So one more thing that I wanted to add before we dive into the next segment of content, which is a really great shortcut within Figma, which is the Command/ if you're on the Mac, or Control/ if you're on a non-Mac machine, which brings up sort of an omni search. And this is great for looking up basically anything. It tells you here menus, commands, and plugins. Anything that you can't remember where it is or how to find it, you will probably be able to find via this. So if you can't remember that O is the ellipse tool because it's not E, it's O, remember I mentioned from last time. You could just type like ELI, which is not how you spell ellipse, but whatever, you get the idea. And the first thing that shows up here is the ellipse tool, and it even tells you what the hotkey for it is. So this is just another nice way of being able to find things and look things up. Again, Command/ or Control/ depending upon your OS. All right, let us dive in. Where were we? Okay, we were talking about vector networks. We did a quick example when we drew our pentagram, and I kind of glossed over some things and promised that we would go into it in more detail, which we are about to do now. As I mentioned last time, Figma works a little bit differently when it comes to vector drawings. And it's important to understand how Figma thinks about this so that you can think about it in the same way and utilize the software to its utmost potential and yours. So let's go ahead and dive into some examples here. I just have a new frame, an empty frame here. Oh God, there's one more thing that I wanted to mention about frames. I totally forgot until just now. Let me just slide over here really quick. When I talked about frames in the last video, one thing that I forgot to mention is that when you go into frames, I think I forgot to mention this. Well, anyway, this might be, I did so many takes of that first video, I actually can't remember. But if you hit the F key to create a frame, you have a number of options for existing frame sizes, sort of predefined sizes, based on a number of things, like a desktop screen for particular desktops, or specific paper sizes, for example. So if you are doing something where you are going to be printing to a particular kind of paper, you can use one of these default frame sizes to do your work within. And when you do your export, it will automatically be the correct size. So anyway, that was one thing that I wanted to mention that I'm pretty sure I forgot to mention in the first video. Just something to think about. Okay, vector networks. As I showed before when we were drawing our pentagram and a couple of other examples, the easy way to start drawing a vector network is to go to the pen tool. And if you don't currently have a layer selected and you just start clicking on the screen, you will start drawing a shape. And I'm just doing single clicks here and not holding it down. I'll show how you can hold down to make curves in just a second. But I'm just kind of like drawing a shape here that is completely meaningless. And if you click on the starting node, it will kind of complete that particular shape. And so now I have this closed in shape. Super easy, makes a ton of sense, works kind of like you might have seen in other software, or how you probably expect for it to work. I'm gonna hit escape to go out of edit, and I'm gonna just move this over here for a second so I very quickly demonstrate how curves work. If you start drawing a line, and instead of just clicking and moving on to the next line, if you click and hold, you can draw a curve, a Bezier curve. And by clicking and holding, you can continue to draw a Bezier curve and you and create a curved shape. If you already have a curved shape, or even if you don't already have a curved shape, you can go to the, I've just hit V to go to the normal move tool. And you can edit that shape, and you can also click and drag the handles of the curve to edit the curve, kind of as you would expect. So that all works as well, and I just kind of wanted to point that out. Okay, let's go back to our shape here, because there's a couple of specific things that I think are good to know about how vector networks work. The first thing that I want to show is how delete and heal works. I've got this shape, and I'm going to hit P again to go into, actually, I'm going to double click on the shape to edit it. And this means that I'm editing the vector network that is on this layer. You could actually have multiple vector networks within a single layer. And I'll show also how to separate things. This was a question that came up when I taught the class on Zoom. One of the questions was, how do I separate shapes? And so I'll show you how to do that as well. But if I just double click on this to go into the vector edit mode, you'll notice as I hover over lines that I get a extra point that is highlighted on the line. And this is a very easy way, even if you have the move tool selected, to add a extra node to your vector network to add a little bit more nuance to it. But let's say that you wanted to remove a node in your vector network. Now, if you just select a node and hit delete, then it will remove that node from the vector network, which means that any lines associated with that node will also be removed. And so now we have this open shape. If we wanted to, I'm going to hit Command C to undo that. If we wanted to remove the node, but maintain a line between the two nodes which that node is connected to, we can use what's called delete and heal, which is very easy to do by holding down Shift and hitting delete. If I hold down Shift delete, then I delete and heal, and you can see that I got rid of that node while still maintaining the line between those two nodes. So that to add, Shift delete to remove and maintain the line. Super handy to know when you're working in vector networks. Cool, so that's neat and all. I'm gonna continue working on this. I'm gonna hit the pin tool again, and I'm going to click on a node in my graph here in my network. And then I'm going to click on another node here to create a line between two nodes in my network. Now, if I go back to the move tool and I select one of these and I move it around, you can see that there's not a separate line here. This is when I was talking about the predictability of how you edit vector networks within Figma. This is what I'm talking about. This, I think, works like you would expect it to work. And this is not how it works in a lot of other software. In a lot of other software, if I had drawn that line there, that would be a separate line, which would be not the same object. If I click and moved that node, it would have just changed this line and not changed the overall shape. Again, I'm going to show how to separate things here in just a second. So that might be a question that you already have queued up. I'm going to answer it in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to show one more kind of cool thing here, which is the paint bucket tool. The paint bucket tool in a vector network allows you to fill in a portion of the network with a fill that will work kind of the way that you think that it should. If I click on the paint bucket tool, I can simply click in one of these shapes that I've created, and it will automatically add a fill to it. I'm going to go ahead and do this other one here, and then I'm going to edit them. So very straightforward. This hopefully makes perfect sense. I'm going to go back to the move tool, and I'm going to select this portion, fill, and I'm just going to change its color. By the way, a quick note on the fill colors. These weird codes, color codes, might not be familiar to you if you're not a web tech person. These are the way in which you express color generally in web technologies. You can also click on the color itself to get a color selector, as you would expect. So that's how the fills work within a single vector network. So I have this weird shape now. And let's say that I wanted to edit these two pieces separately. I wanted to actually have these on separate layers because I want to be able to manipulate them differently. Now, you might say, well, why would you want to manipulate them differently? Can't you just edit that particular vector network? And of course you can. I could select multiple things here and I could move them around, etc. But some things, like let's say that you wanted to rotate this whole bottom section and kind of close up this shape a little bit. That would be something that would be a little bit difficult to do. And if you're hand drawing, for example, which we'll talk about hand drawing in Figma in a second, but if you're hand drawing, then you might end up with multiple shapes on the same layer that you want to be able to separate. So how can you do this without using plugins? I hear there's plugins for this. I haven't actually looked at them myself. But let's say that you wanted to simply separate these into two separate layers. The easy way to do this is you can simply select the portion of the vector network that you want to select, which is easy for me to do in this case because I already used the paint bucket fill tool. And so you can see that I have it selected, which you can tell from these little blue lines across it. And I'm simply going to hit Command C or Control C if you're not on a Mac to copy this portion of this vector network. And then I'm going to say done for this particular drawing, and then I'm going to hit Command V to paste it. Now, if I hide this layer underneath, you can see that I just now have the shape of the stuff that I selected. So this is super handy. By the way, these little eyeballs next to the layer allow you to make the layer visible or invisible. And the little lock makes it so that you can't easily edit it without turning that lock off, which is nice sometimes for like background images and things like that you might accidentally be selecting all the time. Also very common in a lot of software. So let me go ahead and hide that for a second, and we're going to also move this red shape. I'm going to select the red portion of our original shape. I'm going to hit copy again. I'm going to hit escape to exit out of the vector edit mode, and then I'm going to hit paste. And that's going to paste that in on top of the image, or on top of the vector network in the exact same place that it was from where I copied it. So now I have both of these sections as separate items. Now, it's very easy for me to, as I said before, like maybe if I wanted to rotate this, for example, and then I could kind of like move this into here or whatever. And then, or maybe I want to change the ordering here for how it appears. And maybe that's good enough for what I want to do. But if you wanted to combine these two things, here I can hit Command E to flatten these two vector networks into a single layer. Now they're still separate, and you can see that they're kind of overlapping a bit here. And I can easily fix that just by going in and editing the vector drawing again. And using the same techniques that I was using before, I'm just going to drag this node over this other node. And now those two nodes are combined, right? And I'm going to grab this other node that's over here, and I'm going to overlap those two. And now those two are combined. And now our shape is combined again. So hopefully this makes sense and gives you kind of understanding of how you can manipulate vector networks and how sort of vector drawing works within the program with a little bit more detail than we talked about last time. That's about all I want to cover on this particular topic. But again, it should give you enough to continue your exploration on your own. All right, let's talk about hand drawing, which is kind of dovetails with vector networks because it's really just the same thing. There's a slightly different tool for it. This was the logo that I did for the Figma class. And I'm going to just hide this for a second so that you can see what I did here. So I basically pasted this image into Figma, and we're going to talk about images and image editing in a minute, and use this as an outline. And I did this on my iPad with an Apple Pencil because, of course, Figma runs everywhere. And I just outlined the shape of this figure, and I kind of tried to degender it a little bit. And it's kind of a vague outline. But the other thing is that the scan here for this image, for this diagram, is not quite perfect. So when I drew the perfect version of this, the body didn't quite line up with the pentagram because the scan was a little bit funky. So if I can, let me see if I can, yeah, here. So by hovering over this, I can show you kind of the outline of the underlying image and then what it looks like on this top image. In order to make these changes to the vector drawing, I did all of the stuff that I just showed. I selected nodes, and then I put them on their own layer, and then I rotated them, and then I put them back, and I kind of recombined them. And I did this a couple of times to rotate all of the limbs into place and to make it look like I wanted it to look. So how do you actually draw something? Well, super easy, actually. Let me just come over here. I'll just draw out another frame to very quickly demonstrate this. So the pen tool gives you a way of drawing a vector shape, like we were just showing. But you can also select the pencil tool, which is also Shift P. And the pencil tool lets you draw, and I'm drawing on a trackpad here, so obviously this is going to be a little bit of a mess. But when you do a drawing, it creates a vector network out of what you drew to the best of its ability. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be pretty damn good. And this is pretty similar to how any vector drawing program works when you have like a pencil tool. So you can hand draw things, and then you can edit those things as a normal vector network. So I'm going to hit V to go into like the regular move tool. I'm going to double click to select my vector network, and you can see what it looks like here. It's a regular old vector network. And if I wanted to make this a closed shape, I could drag my one node over my other node, and now this is a closed shape, and then I can fill it, and et cetera, and do all of the editing and everything that you want. And like I said, it's kind of nice to be able to, for example, if you have a Wacom or you have some kind of drawing tablet or Surface or whatever, you can run the software. So for example, on the iPad, when I was using it, I just ran it within the web browser and then used the Apple Pencil to draw within the layer. Easy peasy. So, okay, that's the basics of hand drawing. I quickly want to talk about fill types and particularly gradients here. I make a note here that works basically kind of like how you would expect it to work in any other software, or how it does work in other software. I'm just going to draw a rect here so that we can mess around with the fill. I'm just going to center it in the screen for reasons I can't explain. It just feels good to have it centered. When you're looking at the fill, you can click on the color here and you can select the fill color as I showed before. There's also a little drop down here and you can see that it says solid. I can also select several other options here. A linear gradient is probably the gradient that you're most familiar with if you've used other software. And it will create a gradient between multiple colors in your gradient going from the start to the finish. And you have control nodes to specify where start and finish is in the for that fill. If I wanted to, so for this particular case, it took the color that was already the background color, the single solid color, and it created one node for that, and then it created a perfectly transparent node with that exact same color, which is why you're seeing this fade out to white. I can change this color now. I can make it opaque, and then I can change it to another color. And as you can see, it works pretty much as you would expect. If I click on this gradient, I can add another node and I can click and drag it around, and you can see that it's manipulating that. I can also then select a different color for this, and on and so forth and so forth. So if you've ever used gradients in other software, this should totally make sense to you and be the way that you expect it to work. As I said, you can also click and drag these control points as well. Okay, I had a little hand issue there. So I can change the angle of the gradient. I can also select a radial gradient, and you can edit that. You can do an angular gradient, which is kind of sweep gradient in other software. You can do a diamond-shaped gradient. So you have a few different options here. Image we're going to talk about in a little bit. That's not gradient related. Okay, moving on to the next topic. Components. This is a very powerful, I'm going to move my face over here, by the way, just so that we can see this left hand. We're getting down to the end here. I don't want my face to be covering the rest of the options. So components are a way within Figma to say, I have something which is a base item that I want to have multiple instances of, and I want to be able to edit them all at the same time, but each instance of it might be, for example, different sizes or whatever. Let me show how this works. If you're familiar with other software that has the ability to create templates and things like that, this is kind of similar, but it works in a very Figma way, which is great and really fantastic. I'm going to go back to our pentagram, actually, and I'm just going to take this and I'm going to use this as I'm going to copy that with Command C, components demo, and then I'm going to Command V this into this frame here. Oh, and I'm going to also use the, K to scale it, as I mentioned in the first video, so that the line width changes as I scale it. So I'm just going to move this over here for a second. So now I have this layer. I'm going to rename it. Once you get into having complex documents, it's really good to think about naming your layers so that you can find things again easily later, and things make sense when you go back to look at them. So I'm going to say this is just star, and I put a little reminder up here of the hotkeys for managing components, for creating components, and then inserting components. So I'm going to create a component out of this, which I'm going to do by holding down Option, Command, and K. One thing that happened here is that the icon for the star layer has changed into this little 4 diamond shape. And this means that this is now a component. The shape itself is a child of this component. Now, what I can do is if I select this and hold down Alt to create a duplicate of it, I can create a new instance of that component. But I can also use this hotkey here, which is Shift-I. And if I hit Shift-I, it's going to let me search through all of the components that I have in this document and select them. So I can select it there. And now I have this new star, which is a instance of the component which I created. And I'm going to make a couple more here just by dragging these. So now, just to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to go back to my component. And for the star, I'm going to change the corner rounding. And as you can see, the corner rounding is changing for all of the instances at the same time in real time. Now, I can also then select one of the instances of the component, and I can resize it. Or I could, for example, change its, let me move my face again. I can change its color as well. And it's still an instance of this original star. So if I decide that, my rounded corners here are not what I like, I can continue to change them. And as you can see, the attributes which have been applied to the instance are still there, but I can also change the attributes of the original component, and it will change everywhere. This is incredibly powerful. If you are, let's say that you're doing we'll use this actually a little bit in the radial layout. If you have something like maybe you're doing a pentagram that has multiple equal arm crosses around the outside of it, you could create the one equal arm cross, put them around the outside, and then if you want to change and make it a component and have multiple component instances in that diagram, then you can change them in one place if you want to change the styling of it. Very, very powerful. This goes very deep. I'm not going to get into a ton of details here because you can also nest these things and it gets really, really complicated and very powerful. But this is just kind of scratching the surface and maybe help you think about how you want to organize your documents within Figma to take advantage of these features. All right, that's components. Highly encourage you to check it out. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to move my face over here. I keep moving my face. It's fine. This software Loom, which I'm using to do these recordings, it's just really great. It's fantastic software. I also recommend it, and you should check it out. Maybe I'll do a video on Loom at some point. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about working with type. So working with type in Figma works exactly like you would expect. I can hit T for the type tool. I can drag out something, and I can type. They include, Figma includes every typeface I think that's like freely available. I mean, it is a massive, massive list of typefaces in here that you have access to sort of right out of the box for free and that you can use in any of your designs. You can also, if you're using the desktop version of the software, you can also pull in or have access to the fonts that you have installed on your machine. For example, I have the Penguin base fonts installed in this machine, which are some of my favorite fonts, and they are also available in my font list somewhere. What's P becomes before R. So all of these ones that start with PP are the Penguin fonts. So you can also utilize typefaces which are installed on your machine. So anyway, that all works basically how you would expect it to work. You have layout tools and all that good stuff. Now, one thing that if you are using Figma as part of your practice, you might be working with languages that work right to left. And I wanted to call this out specifically because Figma does not, unfortunately, have built-in support for right-to-left languages. It is something I'm sure that they are working on, but it doesn't have it out of the box. However, as I explained in the first video, there's a very thriving community of plugin developers for Figma, and I've pulled in one plugin which is called RTL-PLZ, which I'm assuming is right to left, please. And by holding down Command P on the Mac, I can go to the, I can pull up the plugin functions that are available when this plugin has been added to the document. And for example, I can pull up the RTL editor, and this allows you to actually type text in right to left. And then when you have it in the document, it is laid out correctly, the way that you would expect a right to left language to work. So anyway, that's just one option. I wanted to point out that right to left languages are not natively supported within the platform. Let's talk about radial layouts, as this is something that a lot of people will want to be able to do. And a lot of software really has a hard time with this. And I would say that Figma doesn't do as much as you would want it to do, considering how amazing the software is otherwise, to assist the radial layout. But there are a number of things that you can do in order to do this and to make it work. So one trick that I use for radial layouts is to utilize a stencil. So let's say, for example, you want to lay things out at a particular points along your circle. You can do the exact same thing that we did for the pentagram before, which is to create some line segments that intersect with your circle or your shape, and use that as a guide to place other items. So I'm just going to draw a line segment like I did before, and then I'm going to position it in the center, and then I'm going to edit it again, and I'm going to move. I'm going to hold down Shift so that I get a straight line, and then I'm going to drag that out to the edge. And then I can select this line, drag and drop it, holding down Alt, do the same tricks that we did before, and get guide points that you can use to do your radial layout. So if I go back to my, let's say my equal arm cross here, and I grab this thing, and let's make it a component. And then I'm going to go back to my radial layout, and I'm going to hit Shift-I to bring up the component list, and I can grab my equal arm cross, and I'm going to scale this down a little bit. Actually, I'm going to use the scale tool to scale it down a little bit. And then I can, place this relative to my little guide points. And then I can use the arrow keys to kind of line things up, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then once you're done, you can delete these guides, and then you can lay things out in radially this way by using guides. You can rotate these things so that they fit into place. I did that really poorly. This actually needs to come in a little bit. But anyway, you get the general idea. So that's one trick that you can use for laying things out radially. Of course, you might want to have text laid out radially. And this is another place where I'm going to use a plugin to demonstrate how you can put text on a curve to have it lay out radially. I'm just going to create a bit of text here that means absolutely nothing. And I'm going to move this over to the side here, and I'm also going to change its size here just for a second, just to make this a little bit easier. So now that I have my text, I'm going to select that. I'm going to select my ellipse at the same time. I'm going to hit Command/ to bring up the sort of OmniSearch, and I'm going to find the plugin called ToPath. And when I select this, it's going to give me some options for aligning the text that I created to the path that I have. And I'm just going to click the link button, which is going to go ahead and lay it out. But it's going to lay it out in a way that allows me to edit it over time. So I'm just going to change the vertical, because right now it's laying out on the line, which is probably not what you want. I'm going to change the vertical alignment to 0 so that it's kind of inside that line. And then I'm going to hit the center point, which is just going to set an offset, which is kind of the opposite side. And based on that, I might be able to, for example, kind of move this around the circle and get it laid out, wherever I want. Let's say that I want it like, I don't know, right around there, whatever. So that's a way that you can, using a plugin, you can radially lay out text if you're working in a radial structure. Anyway, that's just a couple of kind of tricks that I use to do sort of radial layouts like this. If you are doing the same kinds of things within Figma, then these might be handy things for you to know. All right, let's talk about images quickly. Images within Figma work really fantastically well. And there's a couple of things to know about it that I want to demonstrate here. First of all, to get an image into Figma, you simply drag and drop an image from your operating system into the document. Very easy. I'm sure there's like an insert image thing too, which I don't even know where that is, but where you might be able to like get a file selector and then select a file. But the easiest way to do it is literally just to go into Explorer or Finder or whatever, and just drag the image directly into the document, and voila, it imports it. So that's super easy to do. Now, you might have noticed when we were doing the gradients before that image was one of the fill types. When you create an image, what actually happens is you create a sort of frame for that image, or a layer that image is the background of. And this is cool because you have a few options for how you can handle that image within that frame. It defaults to fit, which will try to always make the image fit within the confines of the shape that you have created. And I'm going to modify the shape here to show how this works and to make it a little bit more illustrative. So if I shrink this down, when the image has, when the image is being fit into the shape, it will always make sure that all of the pixels of the image are visible. It won't cut anything off. But you do have a few options here. One option is that you can do fill. By selecting fill, it will attempt to fill the shape based on one of the axes, and but it will crop on the other axis. If you want more granular control over the crop, then you can select the crop mode, and that will let you just arbitrarily say, this is the portion of this image that I want to focus on. Now, because Figma is non-destructive in its editing, if you did this in other software, it might actually just completely crop your image down to this. But if I double click on the image, I can then update my crop here, and the original image is still there. It's just modifying it for how it displays on the page. So that's basically how that works. I quickly wanted to also mention that you have some image manipulation controls here as well, which can be super useful depending upon what you're trying to do with the images that are in your document. If you don't want to pull them into some image editing software and really all you need to do is, sort of like bump up the contrast or the saturation or something like that, then you have options to do that here as well, which is very handy. Coming down to the finish line here. You've been working on your cool document and your cool designs, and you've got all of this stuff. So now what? Now is when you can export it in some way from the software to utilize it in some other context. And this is really cool because I think that exporting within Figma is really great and it works so nicely. I'm going to actually move my face again because the export is down here on the bottom of this the attributes panel. If I select my export frame here, which has all of this content within it, if I just go down to export in the attributes list for this particular layer, I can click on it to add an export. And you can also see that I can add multiple exports, which, by the way, we didn't even talk about this in all the others. You might notice that is also possible on fills and strokes and a lot of other things. Not going to get into the details of that, but something for you to explore on your own. And I can specify a few different options for how I want to export it. I can export it as a couple different image formats. I can export it as an SVG. If you're not familiar with SVG, this is a vector graphics format, which is commonly supported on everything. It's often used on the web, but it's also supported everywhere. And it's a really great format for not losing the resolution of your image because you get an actual vector output. And this is really fantastic. You can use this for if you wanted to export something and then display it on the web or whatever. And then, of course, you also have a PDF export, which is really cool because PDF is such a commonly used format. And if you needed to export something and then send it off to a printer or something like that, PDF is probably going to be your go-to. So these are your different options for exporting. You also have some scaling options. There's another quick thing to note once you have export installed is that once you have an export for a particular layer, if that layer has a fill, you also have the option of removing it from the export. So if you want to export something with a transparent background, for example, you can do that as well. So that's how export works. I'll just quickly go ahead and hit this export button. And this is going to give us a PNG. Whatever, I'll drop it on the desktop here. And I'll just show you what that looks like. And there you have it. This is an image, so it's, you know, it's not going to have infinite resolution like a vector drawing does, but you get the general idea. So that's how export works. It's really fantastic, again, because if you're using drafts within Figma for personal usage, there's no restrictions on the software. You can export in all of these different formats without paying a dime for the software. It's really powerful, very cool, and yeah, export to whatever the hell you want. So that was the last item in this Figma class. I really hope that this was useful to people. It's amazing software that has a lot of rich depth once you get in there and you start exploring it and all of the things that it can do. It's just amazing. I've really only scratched the surface in this content. So thank you very much for watching the videos. I'm going to have just plugging a couple of things coming up. I'm going to have an intro to geomancy class that's coming up. I may or may not do a class this time. I may actually just do it as a video series. The classes are really cool, but it's very difficult to get something scheduled that a lot of people can attend. And so a lot of people end up just having to watch the video anyway. And so I might actually do this one purely as a video or possibly a couple of videos. I already have the content. This is actually a class that I had taught for a particular group in the past, and then updated the content a little bit based on feedback. And it's really just if you've been on the doorstep of geomancy, you've heard about it, you're thinking about it, and you're like, it sounds kind of cool, I don't know, and then you go and you check out a book, or you maybe go to Sam Bloch's amazing website, Digital Ambler, and there's a lot of content there, and it really amazing deep dives into lots and lots of different parts of geomancy, and it's such a beautiful, rich system. It's amazing, but it's also kind of it's deceptively complicated. And so coming at it initially can be very overwhelming. And this is really a class to gently introduce folks to the basics of geomancy so that you can dive into it yourself. It's really a very beginner-friendly introduction. So that's going to be coming up very soon. Obviously, if you're watching this video on YouTube, this is my YouTube channel. You can also find me at hallofdoors.com, which is my blog and where I primarily communicate about projects and different things that I'm up to. And then one last plug for a project that I have coming up, which is a project called Mosaic. I don't have a lot to announce on this yet, other than to say that it is a rethink of divination in a digital context. What does it mean to have a digital native divination system? And so that's something that I'm working on. I'm very excited about it. I've already got a lot of rubber on the road on this one, but it's a little early to really share that more, but it is going to be, there will be announcements about it coming up in the near future. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Check out Figma. It's fucking awesome. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.